Got the recording. Okay, the last thing that I had, the last part of the assignment that I'd made was we were going to create triggers. And I don't know that we have to trigger everything. There's just many things that need to be triggered. We need to block. One of the main uses for triggers is to block people from doing stuff. So I need to block people from inserting into certain tables, block people from deleting from tables. So, okay, I don't want you to delete from any of the tables. So you're not allowed to delete, you're not allowed to update the players' tables or any of them, okay? So I'm gonna trigger all of those things. Now, when I have the triggers, let me pull up see, where is my open? Yeah, that's not it. Well, I'll get it in a minute. Here we go. Oh, I thought that was right. Create tables. Okay, what did I do with those files? Well,
I haven't opened it yet, but if it's the one from last week, it's called distribution-1 SQL, which I'm looking for myself.
let me see if I can get it out of this. Okay, here we go. And I'll send this out. So I had it on my, now when we create a trigger.
Sorry to interrupt, but you updated that file.
What's
and
that?
you labeled the updated one distribution. It's in your announcements.
Okay.
The updated one is distribution hyphen the number 1.sql.
Okay. This one right here. Yeah. Okay. So this is the distribution one. This is the one I sent out, and we were going to do several things. Now, this does not all have to happen in one file. These can be distributed over several files, and in the create tables, I would create a table called errata. And in this table called errata, this is going to hold all of our error logs. Now, I would probably create this over in the file where I said create tables, where I'm creating the players and the games and the rounds. I would probably create this one also. This is the log file. And basically, the only thing that I really need there is just a primary key. I have a date that I'm going to timestamp it, and a message that I'm going to put in there that tells you something about why I'm adding this in there. So I made this 256 characters to make sure it's long enough. So these guys are the ones that go with this file. It's got a primary key, a date, timestamp, and a message that I send to the user. The rest of this stuff is just the PID, the name, the date from the player. If there's an error in the player, I'll write it to these guys. If there's an error in the date, I'll write it to these, excuse me, in the game, I'll write it to these guys. Whatever it is, I write everything I know to this log. So this guy gets created with the rest of the tables. It's not a very important, it's not a very difficult table to create. It's pretty simple. It's just big. It's got a lot of fields, but all of them can be null. The only one that cannot be null is the primary key. Okay. Now this guy right here, we're going to create a procedure. The procedure is called write errata. And the procedure is going to, whenever something happens that is bad, we're going to call this procedure write errata, and it's going to insert this into the errata table. So it's going to insert the next value of the game sequence, the date, whatever message I give it. Those are the only required fields. And then the rest of the stuff that I give it, whatever that is. So if I give it a PID, it will insert that. Notice that they all have their own unique names, so I can insert them into it. And so whenever something goes wrong, I write it to the, I call this procedure write errata, and it inserts. Okay. So that's back over in my procedures. So create or alter procedure. Now, when you have this create procedure, if you are using an older version of the server, and you cannot say create or alter on some of the older ones, you'll just have to say create. You should say if you do it like creating a table, and if object ID PRC write errata is not null, drop procedure write errata. But all this procedure does is it takes some data and it writes those data to the errata table. Idea being that the user is not allowed to know about the errata table. Okay, now here's the issue. If I write to the, if I have a trigger and the trigger detects an error, when the trigger detects an error, it will call the procedure write errata. Write errata will write everything I send it. It will write it to the errata table. Then it will throw an error. If the procedure throws an error, everything that was written to any table is rolled back. So that's the whole idea. The trigger detects an error and it says, okay, I'm going to send this stuff to the error table, but then I'm going to raise this error. I'm going to throw the error. The error will cause everything to roll back, including the error logging. So you cannot do anything if that trigger is blocking you. If the trigger throws an error, everything didn't happen, including any changes, okay, which is the objective, which is what we want. But we want to log it also. Okay, this is where the idea of this linked server comes in. So I have to create this linked server first. Now I only do this one time. There's just one time I make this code. In order to execute this code, I have to log in as the administrator. I cannot do this as my regular user. I have to be the administrator to create this linked server. So connect with Windows Authentication and execute this code once. You don't have to do it every time. Once it's created, it's created. You don't have to create it again and again and again and again every time. But if you log into a different server, you have to create it on that server also. So if you come to school and log in on a server, you'll have to create it here. Okay. Now this is the code. Look at how it works here. It says, does it exist? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have my overhead on, do I? I think people trying to look around me to see my... I'm turning it on right now, Sarah. Wait just a minute while this comes up. Questions from online. You guys can see. They couldn't see here.
I am going to have to ask at some point where we're getting all of the, are we relying on the application to pass us the player ID, the player name, the player date, the game ID, the game date, and the...
Yes.
Well, and we're, okay.
That comes from the trigger. So when the trigger executes and detects an error, it calls the write errata function and passes it everything that it wants it to know.
Well, I get that from the general statement you made, but how is it, when we look at this, we actually have, for errata is pulling data from more than one table. It's pulling data from, so I'm wondering, like, are we going to do some sort of select thing as part of the procedure that goes into those tables and looks up the player name based upon player ID, or are we relying upon the application to tell us that?
Yeah, you're getting a little ahead. Right now, we're just trying to get the data into the log file. So if it has something to do with the player ID, then it will record the player ID. If it is a game violation, it will record the game ID. If it's a round violation, it will record the round ID.
Oh, thank you.
A lot of these will be null.
Okay, thank you. I misunderstood that. I thought we were going to capture all of that for every single, thank you, error.
No.
Thank you.
Think of it as you're only going to capture it when you get an error from the trigger, and these had better be very rare. Otherwise, we have a problem. If we're firing triggers, every time we turn around, we need to go examine our code very carefully. We should almost never fire a trigger. The procedures should handle everything. If the procedure detects an error, all right, so we're down here in, you call your procedure, insert player. And unfortunately, you have passed the insert player a duplicate player ID. That is an error. Okay. Big deal. That happens. That procedure catches it, deals with it, returns a error code of 1 or whatever it is, and that's the end of it. The procedure caught it. That is what is supposed to happen. If it gets through the procedure, the trigger catches it. It should not have gotten through the procedure. Now we might test it by disabling the procedure and going straight to it, but the user cannot see our tables. The user cannot do a direct insert into our tables. The user can only call that procedure that says insert player. Insert player checks it before it tries to insert it. If it's wrong, it doesn't try to insert. If it does try to insert, something is wrong. There's a code violation somewhere. Something, either it isn't doing its job or somebody is able to access our tables directly. So the trigger should never execute. The whole idea of this is this should never happen. But when it does, it's one of our layers of defense. Okay, Sarah, go ahead. Okay, in terms of our security, the first thing that the first thing is, well, the first thing is going to be the web page, but we don't have that yet. The first thing is the procedures. So when you want to insert a player, you don't just insert a player into the table. You have to call the procedure. You should not be able to see the tables. So you are a public user. All you can do is execute that procedure. That's the only thing I give you. You execute the procedure and you say, insert player Joe. And then you give them the real name, Jim Bob, or whatever his real name is if you want. I don't know if that's even required. Insert player Joe. It takes that, checks to make sure there isn't already a Joe, and inserts it. What if there is already a Joe? It returns with a 1 error message maybe. That's not a big deal. That just happens. That's where the error is supposed to be caught. Let's say it gets through that and comes into the table, and the table detects it, the trigger detects it. Now it's a more serious error because it got through our first layer of defense.
Seeing it in place, I don't know where I need to put it, where I need to execute it.
Okay.
Do you understand me what I'm saying?
I do understand that you're saying you don't know where to execute the trigger. The trigger will execute itself.
So you compile this one time?
Yes, you compile the trigger. When you create the trigger, compile the trigger onto the table. Anytime anyone tries to insert into that table, this trigger executes. Okay? So when you call the procedure first checks your player. Does it exist? If it doesn't, everything's fine, then it tries to insert. Now it's going to be checked a second time by the trigger. If the trigger detects an error, now that's more serious because our first layer has failed. Are you with me?
Yeah,
okay. But we're going to put the triggers are on the table. The triggers do not get executed by us. As soon as we say insert, that's executed. As soon as we try to say delete, you're not supposed to delete. You're not ever supposed to be able to delete. You can't even see this table. How are you deleting? You don't have a procedure that deletes, but yet here you are trying to delete. That is a serious violation. That needs to get logged. Okay. Now, in order to accomplish this, I have to have what we call a loopback server. I don't know why they call it a loopback server. I don't know why I don't know what's special about this word loopback. But that's the name that many textbooks give it, and many of the documentation. In Oracle, this is called an autonomous process, and it works exactly the same way. Basically, I'm creating a process that is going to happen, and I'm going to turn it loose. I'm going to say, okay, start this process, turn it loose, make it happen. No matter what happens on the server, let the server create errors. I want this process to continue. Okay, and that's the objective here. That's what we're creating. Juana.
Let me see if I understand the order.
Okay, I'm going to come over so people can hear you.
Okay. First, I need to create the database.
First, create the database, yes.
With all the tables.
With all the tables.
After that, I do the trigger.
After that, you do the procedures.
Okay.
I'll show you
compile the
procedures and functions. I'm going to show you that. Okay.
In what moment do you compile the trigger?
Let me take you through it now. Okay. Let's look at that, because the question is, I'm dropping my money. My pouch has a hole in it. I know, I need to get another one. Okay. The first thing I do, I'm going to create the tables. So I titled this one 1, RPS create tables. That's the first one I execute. You might do others. You don't have to do them in this order. This is my suggested order. I create the tables. I drop the tables. Now right here is where I would do the errata table. First thing, create them, okay? Then I create the table players, create the table games, create the table errata. Rounds is in here somewhere, I don't know. I didn't show rounds. Rounds would be there. Okay, you did it. That's good. Okay, so the first thing that happens is I create the tables, drop the tables, recreate the tables. Oh, just a minute. Just a minute. The sequencing. I'm only worried about foreign keys. I drop my foreign keys first. I don't have any foreign keys in the errata table. I'm not too worried about, that's just my place where I put stuff. So anything I don't know where to put it, I put it in the errata table. So there's nothing, the errata table does not have any foreign keys. It does not have any constraints. You can put anything, can be null. The only thing that is required is the primary key. And maybe the date if you want to, maybe a message if you want to constrain it. It's up to you. But I don't have any foreign keys, so you can drop this anytime. Now, after that, the next thing I create is the sequence. I used to have students create a sequence for every place they were using it. I don't see any reason to make you do that. One sequence is enough. So you can take a primary key from it. So one primary key can be 1, the next one over here can be 2. There's nothing special about those primary keys that we have to have different sequences for each one. That makes sense. They can all, so if the primary key of the first player is 1, then the second player is 2, then I can have the game ID is 3, that's fine, it doesn't hurt anything, and then the next player can be 4, doesn't hurt anything at all. So we only need one sequence, and that saves us a little typing and fooling with it. So create and start. Questions so far? The next thing I create are my functions. There's nothing special about functions. Um, a procedure can call a function, but a function cannot call a procedure. Therefore, in this world, I create my functions first because it makes sense to do it that way. So I create my get player name, get game ID. I think that's all I've got. Maybe I would create the winner function.
Did you get to the function to replace
The thing that swaps the two player names, that is a procedure. That is not a function. And that's why I was griping about SQL Server, because SQL Server does not allow me to call a procedure from a function. So there's nothing that I would like better to do than to call a procedure right there instead of putting all that code in. I would really love to call the procedure swap right there, but it won't let me do that. Oh well. I'm just going to have to live with the language I've got instead of the language I want. Okay. So after I have created my functions, the next thing I will create will be my procedures. And so here's the procedure swap. This is just for me to use when I want to. This just simply exchanges to user IDs. It might come in handy for something later. Handy little procedure. I can always do it longhand in the code, but you know, it's nice to have. Insert player. A couple of versions of that. Insert game. Another one called insert round. What else do I have? Another one called write errata. I remember write, so I put write errata in there with the procedures. Fine. Well, he goes in there, and he's pretty simple. I mean, he's a little tedious, but he is simple. There is no particular heavy logic in that.
Before we leave the insert game procedure?
No. It's right there with them. So it's just another procedure. It's just a program that's in that file with the insert game, insert round, and another one is write errata, because it's just a different. They're completely separate programs. So write errata gets called. Its job is simply writing something to the errata table. It gives it a primary key. It gives it a date stamp. It puts the message in there, and then whatever you say to write to it, it writes to it.
Yeah, but because I'm thinking about the logic.
It has very little logic in it. It doesn't have logic in it. It just simply, if you tell it to write the PID, there's only one field named PID. That's the primary key of the players table.
Correct.
It writes it.
Correct, but you need to go over there after you go to one of the another procedure.
No, I'm not there yet. I'm not there. That's I'm just simply writing procedures. I have a procedure called insert player. Okay, I get begin, end, I'm done with it. I've written it. I have a procedure called insert game. I have a begin, end, I'm done with it. I haven't called it yet. I'm not executing it. I have another procedure called write errata. I have a begin, end, I'm done with it. I haven't executed any of them. I'm going to execute them later. So writing errata, errata's job is simply to take an error message and write it to the table with everything I know, everything I can possibly send it. Okay. And I mean, it's a kind of a long procedure, but there's no logic to it. There's no if in there. There's nothing you have to worry about. If you send it if you say write errata, it'll get it. It'll put its it gets its next value. It gets the date. And you give it the message of neener, 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 bite me. Well, okay, that's fine. That's what it writes.
Okay, I understand what you are saying right now, that I'm going when the process is running.
We're not running the process yet. Wait till I get there. Where the process running, when the process is running, you're asking me about what process is running. The process is running is a transaction processing world. We don't have a master program. We have a web page out there that is calling our procedures. So this web page is going to be running. We're going to design a web page. The web page is going to say, and okay, what is your player ID? And you type in your player ID, and you click a little button, and the button says insert game. And when you say click that button that says insert player, you click the button that says insert player, and it goes out and it executes this procedure. Now, what does the procedure do? It either comes back with a 0, everything's fine, hey, we're happy, we're cool, it happened, or it comes back with a 1 or 2, whatever. And then the procedure, the web page tells you, yay, it worked, or the web page tells you, no, I'm sorry, you got to choose a different one. Okay, so there's no, it's not like a C program that is running where you start it and you say execute and it go d d d d d and it says hello world, goodbye world, and it says a bunch of stuff and does cute things like that. This is a transaction processing environment. Okay, so our code that we're building is going to get executed in pieces, and so when we execute the insert player, what's going to happen? We're sitting out there on our web page and we execute insert player. Let's find it. Insert round. Oh, here we go right here. Insert player. Here he is. Okay, insert game. Insert player. Okay. Now let's do it. We click the button and the web page is connected to our database and it is logged in as public user. A user that it cannot see anything except what we give it, and we're going to allow it to see these procedures, only these procedures. It cannot see our tables. And that is, we don't want the web page to see anything. Why not? Because web pages are very vulnerable. Web pages are going to get knocked over. Web pages, they're going to get the passwords. So what if they do? They can't do any more than they could have done owning the web page. So just because they can't do anything that they couldn't have done as the web page, just because they know the procedure's name in my database, they could execute it, but that's all they can do. What does that do? They execute this procedure by pressing the button. You press the button, or maybe it's an attacker that presses the button, whatever. Now, what do? They send you the player ID. They send you the player's name. And it gets a variable from the web page. So there's a variable on the web page that is that output. Something happens down here. So we go down there, it gets set to 0, and something happens. Let's say the PID is null, or let's say the PID exists. What happens? The error level comes back as a 2. What happens? The only thing that the web page knows is the error level came back a 2. It says, oops, sorry, web, and in its logic, it says, there's a 2. I'm going to send you the message that says, sorry, that one already exists. Doesn't know anything else. It comes back as 0. What?
Okay, over there. In that moment that you execute that procedure,
Yeah.
give you a error in
It gives me.
for the website. I suppose you need to run the errata.
No, we're not there yet. We're not running errata. just a minute, and I'll tell you when we're going to run it. Let me get through this one first. Okay, this one is executing. So we've pressed the button that says insert player, and it's either a good player or a bad player. If it's a good player, fine. If it comes back 0. If it's a bad player, it comes back 2. Everything's finished. It's done. Then it goes on and waits for your next wonderful command that you give it, because nothing bad has happened. That's probably what's going to happen. People are going to give it bad things. I'm not going to log those. I haven't had a trigger. Nothing bad has happened to my database. I caught it where I was supposed to catch it. At this level, this is where I'm supposed to catch it. Now, let's say something happens and somebody sneaks in and somebody manages to execute this code without going through the procedure. But they can't see the T players. Nobody outside of the database can see this, but somebody has managed nefariously to sneak in here and has tried to execute this with a bad value. What happens? We didn't catch it here. We didn't catch it in this procedure. Somehow this executed with bad data, and we failed to catch it. Now what happens? Okay, now our trigger executes. And I'm about to talk about right errata, because now we've got problems. But if we catch it, if there's bad data in the procedure, there's just bad data in the procedure. Right. Right. It's like if you if you're a have a convenience store and you have a clerk and somebody gives your clerk the wrong change. You know, they give their bill is $7, they only give $5, and the clerk catches and says, "I'm sorry, you owe me another $2." Okay, that's an error, but big deal. They caught it, they fixed it. End of conversation. But if at the end of the day you discover you're short, now you've got a problem, even if it's only $2, because you're short $2. Well, it's not about the $2, it's about what happened. How did you get there? Okay, so the problem is that something happened, something got through, anything gets through, we have a problem. Okay, this is how we fix our problems. We have a problem with our world. All right, my next one. So these are the procedures, and I'll come back to the right errata. Got 2 of them, 5 and 6. Number 5 is create linked server. Now, create linked server happens one time. It has to happen as the administrator, the Windows user. Creating the linked server essentially allows the trigger to execute something that does not get rolled back. Okay. I'm sorry, Sarah? Say that again. Yes, I can say that again. It goes by several names. We call it an autonomous. Is that a word that you know? Autonomous. It means it executes on its own. It has autonomy, meaning that I'm thinking it does not have, it is not owned by anyone or anything. It does what it wants to do. Okay. And we call it in this one, we call it a loopback server or a linked server. I like the term autonomous better because it tends to tell me more what it is, but that's over in Oracle, they call it that. Now it's different in the way you do it, but what you do is the same thing. You create a server. So let's start with this on line 5. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is say, does it exist already? Well, this is pretty simple. I mean, you've seen this. If it exists, drop it. Okay, this is the code. I'm going to give you this code. You'll have this code. If you execute this code, it will work. You have to execute it as the Windows authentication. Now, execute again. Add link server. The server's name is Loopback. You can name the server anything you want to. I suggest you name it Loopback because that's what all of the documentation online calls them. They always call, if you do Google on Loopback, it'll show you this. Product. The rest of this stuff, this works. If you execute it just like this, it will work. You don't necessarily have to understand everything about it. I don't, but I know that this code works because I did it. Then we have to configure it, server option, and we have to configure certain things. This configures those things. If you execute this, it will work. You have to execute it as Windows authentication. If you just take this code, run it, it will work. It will create the loopback server. Now we have two servers essentially, and I can just let me finish. I can execute something on this server, and then I can error out, and that will continue. So it's like I say, you know, this happens, and I send it off. I send it by registered mail to somebody, but whatever happens to me, but that letter goes. Now your question.
Okay, when we work at home, we open our service. Do we need to do something like that?
Yes, whatever server you're working on, you will have to log in as the Windows authentication, and you will execute this code right here, and you don't have to change anything about it. If you just copy it and drop it in there, it will run.
Yeah, and you don't need to go to the computer and open the service and keep it active.
No.
Okay.
It'll take care of itself.
Okay.
All you have to do is execute this code, and your loopback server is now running, and it'll stay running until you stop it. Okay. So if you decide you don't want it anymore, you can just execute the first line of it. If you just execute this, it will go away. Then you won't have it. And then the rest of them, put it on there. I guess I need a semicolon there, don't I? And it's really that simple. It's just, I know I should be more going for understanding. The understanding here is we're creating a linked server, and the linked server, basically we have two servers, and when I send one off onto the other server, I can throw an error in my trigger, and I will not roll that one back. It will happen. The same thing is true. It works the same way in Oracle, except it's called an autonomous process. That's essentially the same thing. They all have to have it because I need a way to say I want to log something and to throw an error. The two are incompatible ideas. I have to be able to log something and throw an error at the same time. This is what allows me to do that. Okay, given that we do that, all you do is execute this. I give you the code, just execute it. Don't argue with me. Okay. Close this. Now, oh yes, I guess I better save that, hadn't I? Yes. Okay. After I do that, I can create my triggers. Now, I don't have to create that every time. They're numbered. They're numbered. This is number 6. Create the triggers. This is an example of a commonly used trigger. All of the triggers look a lot alike. This trigger blocks deleting. You're not allowed to delete. Okay? Yes, I do. If you try to delete, if anybody gets in here, you're not supposed to be able to see the table. Therefore, there's no way you can do delete on the table, but somebody did it anyway. Uh-oh, something's wrong. Bad things have happened. I don't understand why this semicolon is here. Some of them need it, some of them don't. I'm going to go ahead and put it there. If yours needs it, okay. If not, okay. I don't think it needs, I can't imagine why that's needed, but it says, okay, what am I doing? Execute. On the loopback server, this is the database. DBO, database owner, so those are required there. Procedure write errata. The message. Write the message. It's going to give it a, it will automatically get a primary key. It will automatically get a date stamp, and it will get that message. Everything else is just null. Okay. Somebody tried to do this at that date. There's a lot of other things I can do. This trigger can be owned by the system, and it can pick up the user's ID that tried to do it. It can pick up the terminal ID. It can shut down the database. Okay. I mean, it can do anything. Right now, all I'm doing is writing to errata. Because I put it on the loopback server right here, I said, write it to the loopback server. That went out in a registered letter to somebody. Now, I'm going to throw an error. Everything I did rolls back. Even a delete, even if you tried to delete, it rolls back, nothing happens, except this happens. Why? Because that's on the loopback server. It's on a different server. So I throw the error, and that happens. And that is, that's how triggers work. All right, let's look at another one. By the way, this is how you turn triggers on and off. Obviously, if I'm going to need to delete the players, if I'm going to say, okay, I want to, reset everything and start over again, I'm going to write a little file that deletes all my players. Well, I can't delete my players. Why? Because the trigger is going to stop me. Okay, so I have to turn the trigger off, and then when I finish, I turn the trigger back on. So just kind of think of it as a light switch. I can turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, do what I got to do, turn it back on. So check insert. Okay, this is going to be the one that checks the insert on T players. You can't delete. Delete, just poof, no way. Okay, here's the trigger.
Can I ask you a question you'll probably hate me for?
Please go ahead. Tracy.
You'll probably hate me for asking, but
oh, wow. Get over it.
What if you did after rather than the instead of? What if you did after delete? Then you would be able to delete a tuple or a row, and then you hit the trigger?
We are going to, right now, I'm only going to worry about instead of triggers. There are several different options on the triggers, and these guys are in a state of development. They change. So some of them are, some platforms have what they call before triggers, and they happen before the change works, and others, and then there's another one called after, and in SQL Server it's called an instead of trigger and not a before trigger. So instead of delete, do this. In Oracle it would be called a before you delete, do this. There is no logical difference in the two. Because you either are saying, okay, go ahead and let it happen, or block it, okay? I think, personally, this is one of the few places that I like SQL Server better. So instead of makes more sense. Instead of deleting, do this. Now, if you did after delete, that trigger would fire, that's called its coupling mode. It would fire after it happens, so it might be after update. After you updated a plays table, for example, where you had R, P, and S in it, then you might execute the function that recalculated the winner and updated the winner's field of that table. So you would go ahead and insert it and then execute it. So it would be something that you needed to do to clean it up afterwards. On a security, triggers are usually executed before or instead of. After triggers are usually record keeping, and sometimes those are used for logging also. Say, well, I'm going to let it happen, but I'm going to make a record of it, and then we'll go give that person some special high intensity training if they do something wrong. Just a minute, let me. Okay, Tracy, did I get your question? After triggers would be, I mean, they are what they say they are. We're going to be mainly using the instead of triggers, which are also known as before triggers. But you could use an after trigger. Okay, Juana?
So in the situation that you want to write errata, and you are gonna, for example, do something with the table, you don't call look back.
You mean you mean as Tracy was asking there, on an after trigger? Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. It would depend on what I wanted the trigger to do, because there are so many different possibilities here that I have to focus on one piece of it. So I'm focusing on the before triggers, and I'm focusing on the security triggers. After triggers are typically record-keeping triggers, and yes, they work. I could also roll back. If I threw an error in an after trigger, though, it would not necessarily roll back the what happened. So after triggers are not used for security. Let's look at this checking the insert on players. Okay. It's an instead of insert, meaning before. All right, we're going to limit this a little further than just before and after. So not only instead of triggers, I'm going to limit it a little bit more. Inserted. Inserted is a table that exists only in the trigger. Inserted, notice it's, well, okay, it's not blue. In other platforms, it's called different. I think in Oracle, it's called new. It's the data that are coming in. So the data that are coming in are in a table called inserted. I can see what is coming in and look at it because it's in this table. Now let's look at what I do here. Select count of anything from inserted. So if that's greater than 1, meaning you're trying to do a multi-row insert. I don't want to deal with that right now. That opens a whole bucket of worms for me, right? I'm going to limit you only to one insert at a time. You cannot say insert into players, Jim, comma, Bob, comma, Jane, comma, Billy, comma. I'm not going to let you do that. You're going to have to do the insert into players, Jim, insert into players, you know, you're going to have to do it in one row at a time because that's how it's going to come in from the web page. And lots of times you limit it this way because if I allow you to put it in multiple inserts, in multiple row, insert one insert, and do it all in one, it just really makes my programming much more difficult. And let's make it easy for us. So this makes it easy for us. This one. Multi-row inserts not allowed. It's not a security problem. We just don't allow it. I didn't even really have to write it to errata. I could have just not worried about it, but somebody's doing something bad if that happens because they're not supposed to be able to do that. Okay. Now, we get past that. That shouldn't ever happen. I should never see that one. Begin. Declare. PID, PName, PDate. Go out to inserted. Grab those guys that are coming in. I've already checked. I only have one row. So I'm going to have one PID, one PName. Maybe I'll have a PName. I don't believe I ever said that I cared one way or the other whether you put a PName in it or not. Maybe I'll let you make that one null. I haven't put anything in there about PName. And PDate need to be coming in. Now I check them. Is he null? It shouldn't be here with him null. I should never get here with the PID null. I should never have gotten here with a PID that already exists. Oh no, prohibited operation. It's logged. I could log the user ID. I could log the terminal ID. I'm just keeping it nice and simple for us. All I'm doing is just logging a message and then throw the error, primary key violation. Well, otherwise, boom, insert. Now I have one last little layer of protection after this. So my first layer of protection was the procedure. Well, the first layer of protection is I'm not going to let you even see the tables. Second layer of protection is the procedure. I let you use the procedure and only the procedure to touch my tables. The third layer of protection is the triggers, and the fourth and last layer of protection is the table constraints. I never want to hit a table constraint. That means I'm in trouble. Okay, so if that's getting hit, I'm missing something big time. Okay, so I've got a problem if the trigger is firing. I never want a trigger. If a trigger fires, that's like an alarm bell going off. If the trigger blocks anything, because it's supposed to be handled at a layer above that. But if the trigger is executing, then I'm already in trouble. And so we will write triggers on, let's write delete triggers on all three of our, they're just delete, like the delete trigger on the players. Just anytime anybody tries to delete, block it. log it. And then we will write the check triggers on insert players, insert game, insert round. We'll have check triggers. We could write other triggers. We could write update triggers. I don't think we need to full update triggers, and delete triggers are essentially the same thing. And we'll end up with lots and lots and lots and lots of triggers. Really, if we write 2 triggers, I think we'll have plenty. So a delete trigger, nobody's allowed to delete, and nobody is allowed to come in with a bad insert. And then we can test it. And the way we would test it is if you tried to insert directly into the table, not using the procedure. Okay, so you own the table, you can see the table. If you try to insert into the table and it has the trigger active, it should block you and log you and throw you out.
So the trigger should be coming in that moment.
The trigger, if you as you're the owner of the table and the trigger is enabled on the table, if you try to insert something that is already in the table, it should block you and log you. If you try to insert using the procedure, the procedure just says, nah, I can't do that. So that's okay. But if you try to do it directly into the table, that's where you get blocked and logged. Am I making any sense at all here, ladies and gentlemen on the internet?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, let me look at anything else, and do I need to send this out again? I think you have all this code. Distribution is there. Okay, so creating the triggers. So there's a block trigger, blocking something. It would be the same for blocking delete on anything. It's just, you just change a few of the names. Delete games instead of delete, you do the same thing. Yeah, well, it's not, I don't see what's so different about that. Yeah, we'll have 3 delete triggers. I could also do update triggers, but I don't see why I need to worry about it. You're not allowed to update either, so it's the same trigger. What else have I got here? Create views. I gave you a few views. You can create a view anytime that it tickles your little heart to create a view. If you want a view to do anything, to accomplish anything, you create a view. If you decide you don't want it, you just drop it. It doesn't hurt anything one way or the other. I'm not gonna go into a whole lot. I gave you some ideas about views, what I would do. You can look at my views. I thought there's some interesting logic there. Left outer joins and right outer joins in the views. But you create any view. I have a view. I need to create this report. Okay, fine. I create a view. The view gives me that report. Because essentially, what is a report except putting together the data that some nitwit in management wants? Okay, so you put it together for them. The last little piece of this is, I don't know why that's red. Don't care. Grant execute. Now, these guys are important. Typically, you will have to do these. You should probably do these anytime the tables change. So anytime that you change anything, you are probably going to have to run this code and re-grant the execute. if you change any of the procedures in any way, it will probably revoke the execute privilege. Basically, I'm saying that anybody who is logged in to my server gets to execute the procedure insert player. And this is why I say that I'm not too worried about it. Okay, if you have an error, you have an error. Well, where's that error coming from? The public. What does the public know? Nothing. What do you expect from them? What assumptions can you make about them? Nothing. They don't know anything about how to put something in there. Anything, you know, it's just they log into the web page and, you know, they might type in any darn thing. And we cannot ever allow that to crash us. But the idea being, I don't want that to be a big error that sends me screaming with my sirens and flashing lights and everything either. Whatever they do, they do. I catch it here. And so the idea is that I catch my errors. They don't ever get through that. They never get any closer to me than this. They never know about the tables. They never know the names of the tables. They never know the names of the functions. They never know the names of the views. The only thing they know is they know that procedure. And they probably know, they don't have to know anything. They don't even have to know that. They know there's a button I push. But who is public? Public is the web server. So the web server logs in as public. That's it. The web server does not know the password to get in as your user. The web server does not know about the tables. The web server is not allowed to know about the games table, about the rounds table, about the players table, about any of the functions. The only well, the rounds, they might know about functions if you give them a function. They might know about a view if you give them a view. So if the web server needs to know some information to put a report out online for people, then the web server would have to have a view to be able to do that. But we want to keep the web server nice and ignorant. We don't want the web server, because the web server is going to be vulnerable. Why is a web server vulnerable? Well, I know, but we don't like powerful web servers. So. Well, yeah, they can screw up everything if you pardon your language, huh? A web server is like a 7-Eleven store. That if you walk up to the store, they can't lock their doors. A woman, when I was a kid in college, when I was in college, I drove a taxi cab, and a woman, she was concerned about me because I was so young and innocent. And she said, "Don't you lock your doors at night?" And I said, "Ma'am, if I locked my doors, nobody could get in the car." Well, same thing is true for web servers. They have to answer their door. So somebody walks up and rings the doorbell on port 80, the web server has to respond. The web server is vulnerable right there. As soon as they open that door, bam. Okay. So web server is going to get knocked over. And I don't want any information on that web server that can be used to compromise my SQL server, which is hidden behind the firewall. Now, we're not going to go into a whole lot of firewalling it. That's a course in networking and servers. Right now, we're doing SQL programming. So we're building these programs such that we have these three little, I guess I should point with my mouse instead of with my hand, that we have these three little keyholes, and we might open others. We can open others, but we have these three little places that they are allowed to talk to us. And they talk to us through the keyhole, and we slip them back their answer through the keyhole. What?
The errata.
They don't know anything about errata.
They don't want to know.
They don't know about errata because errata, remember, happens only if this is violated. I really don't want them to know about errata. That's my log file. That's a important security file. So they don't know about players. They don't know about the table games. They don't know about the player rounds. In fact, I probably wouldn't even name them that, but I just named them that. Right? I don't know what I'd name them. I don't want to give them any information. Yeah, there's a players, so they can probably figure out what's going on. But the point being that we push them back, push them back, push them back, and now the web server only has the public login, public user login, and a public password. And so anybody in the world has the same rights that that web server has. The web server knows about those 3 keyholes, and that's the only thing the web server can use to talk to me through. And so we have this protocol, and the web server sends me a name. My procedure checks it, sends the web server back a 0, a 1, or a 2, which means something. And then the web server gets that back, and then the web server talks to the user intelligently and says, let's see, I got a 0. That means everything's fine, wonderful, wonderful, it happened. A web server gets a 1, that means, I guess it would mean what, a null. You know, you gotta have a player name. Why are you sending me no player name? Right? And so the web server is going to check everything it can. Now the web server doesn't have to try to send a null player name to the SQL server. The web server can check that on its own. Anything the web server can check on its own, it'll do that. But we're not there yet. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Yes. Errata table is not out there for public view. None of our tables are out there for public. Everything about our tables is controlled by us. Everything about our tables is controlled by our procedures. If anything gets through the procedures, it hits the triggers. And the triggers we're control freaks. And the whole idea of being a database programmer is control, 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 layers and layers and layers of security. Okay, and it's usually not real, security in programming is not particularly, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, sexy, I guess. It's not particularly, I keep wanting to think of James Bond, and secret agents. It really isn't. It's about locking doors, and pushing people back, and putting layers and layers between you. And it really doesn't have a whole lot to do with hacking. For the most part, when a computer system gets hacked, it's because somebody left a door open. And they really don't do a whole, yes, I know that there are some really good hacking tools and things like that, but somebody failed to close a door. Somebody left forgot to block access to turn on a trigger or something like that. And the bottom line is, even though, yes, I know there's some really good, neat stuff out there that you can do with, wow, look at this, I've got this really wonderful hack. Most of it is just making sure the doors are locked. Because when you look at burglaries that happen in home burglaries, they mostly happen because somebody didn't lock their doors. Burglars don't pick locks. Burglars don't break windows. They just don't. They find a door that's unlocked. And if they don't find your door unlocked, they'll go look in somebody else's house. And so the same thing is true here. We're locking the doors, checking the doors, making sure they're locked. Okay, and the way we do that is with the triggers. Okay, so we do that first with the procedures first, then we create our linked servers, and that lets us write to the errata table, and then we have our triggers that call the linked server. So we need the linked server, and that's a trick that you do with triggers. It's not the only reason in the world to use triggers. Questions. Goodness, it's 7:22. And I wasn't going to talk long tonight.
It's not a question about triggers, but it's about how we should present our or turn in our assignment.
Yeah.
Since we are creating multiple files, is like I was looking to see how, I don't see a way shorter than creating like an executable script to get.
No, we don't have that in SQL Server. Let's just do it kind of like I did it there. Let's have a folder, and inside of that folder we'll number them 1, create tables, 2, create Java 3, a number. I put that number at the first, so that when I see them sorted in that order. It would be nice if we had an executable script that we could say, okay, boom, and now we just run all of those files. Wouldn't that be nice? We don't have that in SQL Server. And if we were in Oracle, we would have that. Well, I guess we need to go be in Oracle, don't we? But we don't have that in SQL Server. So we're just going to have to go through it being 1, 2, 3. So Tracy, to answer your question, how you would present them to me would be in a zip file will be fine. I may have said do not zip your files, but that doesn't count in this class.
Okay.
Okay.
And do you want the files that we use to test our procedures, or the files that we use, we can create a...
Yeah. Go ahead and finish your sentence, please. I've interrupted you.
Well, just like you pointed out, when it comes to testing our procedure, we're going to do it similar to the way we did our procedures homework. We're going to pass in parameters and make sure that we insert in the table. When it comes to testing our triggers, we're going to just create a little SQL executable, like we're Joe Blow who just put something bad in the data, And that's, Juana, I wondered if one of the questions you were having was something similar to what I had initially, which was, how am I going to test my trigger? Well, I'm going to test my trigger by putting, running the script to create it in my database. And then just go into a regular SQL window. Think of yourself not as necessarily some hacker and did I get through the web server, but think of yourself as a coworker.
Exactly.
You created the database, and your coworker, while you were on vacation, went in and said, oh, look, no one's used these player IDs in years. I'm just going to delete them. And then just do things like, like that. Yep. So you can just create a regular SQL file that tries to insert bogus data. Do you want us to submit the test stuff that we do like that?
By all means, anything that you want me to see. I tend to be somewhat of an open format here, so this is a little bit more like writing an essay than it is about answering questions, okay? So anything that's testing it, I will certainly look at that. So I think of this as, I'm not going to get two identical, I better not get 2 identical programs from anybody. If I do, something's wrong. So everybody's going to be different. Everybody's going to be thinking differently.
Actually, on that note, you've given us a lot. So like a lot of our tables, if we look at them and say, well, I see no reason to change, or to add other things to my table than what you've added. I mean, rounds will be unique for each one of us, but players and game IDs kind of what we've done in class. So,
I think there'll be enough variants there that,
Okay.
and particularly as we get into the server. But I find that if I don't give some direction to it, people will tend to go in follow blind alleys. In other words, they'll tend to write their SQL code as if they were writing C code, where it runs and then it prints messages to the screen. So SQL code almost never prints anything to the screen. It just returns a value and it lets the web server take care of the printing. Things like that.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm grateful for the guidance you've given us in those tables.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong on that. I'm grateful.
Yeah. There's plenty of variants allowed in it, and particularly on the testing, because that will I want it to be tested. So yeah, show me that you've tested it, please. I want to see that. Yes. Absolutely. Others? Anybody else out there besides Tracy? Who else do I have online tonight? Hang on. Oh, let's see. Chris, how you doing? Kristen?
Doing well, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
There's a couple questions in the chat, if you don't mind.
Chris, is that you talking?
It is.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering, someone had I think Josh asked it. That was a good question. What do you want turned in so far? And then also for the documentation that you mentioned a couple of times, did you want that separated or within the code, within comments like you've shown us so far, where we have, error 1 equals this, error 2 equals that? Just more along the lines of how you want to see it turned in, I guess.
Okay, I'm very good at reading code. I demonstrate that you know what you're doing, and I'm pretty good at picking out what you're doing and how you're thinking. I've been teaching programming for 35 years, so it's, that I'm not new at this, at reading students' code. So the documentation would be more for you to tell me that you know what's going on in it. So when you say, like 1 means a null PID, for example, okay? I'm not saying you have to do it that way, but if you did do it that way, that's fine. If you didn't document it, I could see it. I could read the code and tell, but I would like to see it documented because that tells me that you know what you're doing. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, that's fine. I didn't know if there was a certain style that we were just going to practice or anything like that for good practices. But
at this level, you're starting to develop your own style. I can show you mine. I hope I have shown you one that is mine, but you will develop your own. And it's kind of like when we get to this class, I don't tell students that they have to write inner join and left outer join and all that kind of stuff. How you write it is your business, given that it works. And
okay, got it. You got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Others? Let's see, I saw somebody was in the chat. Did somebody send me a chat a minute ago that I missed? Josh, which assignments should we already have turned in? Yeah, that's true. Right now, only 2 have due dates. We are coming up on the midterm, which is the 200 pointer. And I will go ahead and put due dates on them. So the midterm will be essentially the SQL Server backend. And then for the rest of the class, we're going to take over, we're going to go into, what am I trying to say? The Visual Basic, which is the web page. And so we're going to do some essentially Visual Basic programming. I don't like, Juana's sitting here making faces at me. I don't particularly like Visual Basic, but you don't always get to pick programming languages that you happen to like. There's some things about SQL Server, TSQL. I don't particularly like it, a few things that it does. But I'm not going to just sit here and rag on the server because, okay, what? I don't like it. Well, yeah, I don't like that. I always hate it when teachers sit there and they spend all their time griping about the textbook or griping about the programming language. Well, you know, go get rich. If I don't like my car, I guess I can always get rich and go buy a Mercedes. Oh, well. SQL Server is used all over the industry. And it is used with Visual Basic a lot because Visual Basic is a Microsoft product that interfaces very, very well with it, very easily. And you don't like Visual Basic. I don't blame you. I don't either. But we're going to use it, and we're going to use the interface, the language. So I'll come next time and we'll get it installed. I need to go over with you how to install it on your machine at home. And I'll need to run through it and bring myself up to date on it because I always forget. It's been a year since I've done it, so I will have forgotten by now. So don't ask me right now how you do it because I can't tell you, but we're going to do it. Others?
So you want all this stuff that we talked today done by next Wednesday?
No, done by 9 o'clock tonight. Why?
Okay.
Juana says, yeah, sure. Piece of cake, huh? The question was, what is due? Okay, it's due. That's what's due. That's what we're now. That's where we are now. Is what I went through tonight. It's the triggers up to the grant executes, which are on the board now. So up through this point right here, and so mine is numbered 12. I don't think I've used all my numbers, but I started off with 1, 2, 3. So I put a 1 underscore create tables, 2 underscore 3 underscore, and so that keeps them in order for me. If you want to go 2, 4, 6, 8, so you can put something in between if you need to, that'll be fine. You can label them 1.5. I mean, there's lots of things you can do. I'll figure it out. Main reason I number them like that is just so they'll show up in order. And it would be nice if I had a executable script and I could say, okay, execute 1, 2, 3, 4, like the machine gun, and it would do it. Wouldn't that be nice?
I think it might be possible. I was just looking up something that talked about.
It is possible. It is possible. Yes, and but it opens another another bag of worms that I'm just gonna say, if you want to do it, you can do it. You can put it out on the discussion page if you want to do that. I'm not going to go into it because it's complicated and I don't have to have it. Yes, you're correct. You can do it. What do they call that? What's the name of the thing we're looking for?
Is it the XP command shell? I don't know. I hadn't figured it out. I hadn't figured it out yet. I just
right. Yeah. There's a name. I'll know it when I hear it. I don't think it's a command shell. It might be something similar to that, but there is a way, yes. And I've just never, in Oracle, it's a lot easier. Let's put it that way. Others. So Tracy, you go figure it out and get back to us. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna end the recording there for right now, and I'm gonna take off my Mickey Mouse ears, and I'm gonna go pausing the recording now.